Hi, welcome to a special virtual presentation of the 2021 London Swine Conference. I'm Teresa Van Ray, your LSC chair and a very proud pork producer from Huron County. Last year, we marked our 20th conference. Since 2001, the London Swine Conference has helped connect producers, researchers, industry, and policymakers across our pork sector. It's an important opportunity to share science-based information that helps each of us do our part to make our businesses and industry stronger. So we all know that chatting with each other face to face and having that cup of Java, the odd glass of hops, or fermented grapes, my favorite, it's such a huge part of learning from each other and, well, a lot of fun. Remember, fun? Not sure about you, but I've not exactly felt in control of a lot in my life lately. However, knowledge is power. Knowledge can help us gain back some of the control we all need to have success. While we aren't able to gather this year in person, we are excited to bring you a series of live and on-demand presentations from people at the top of their fields. We are one of the many phenomenal industries that have continued to produce food for the world throughout this past year. For that, thanks to each and every one of you and your families. So sit back. We invite you to enjoy this virtual presentation. And I, for one, look so forward to seeing each and every one of you face to face and celebrating with you in 2022.
Hi there, and welcome to the London Swine Conference live online session. It's great to have you with us today for this lunchtime session. I'm the moderator for our event today, and my name is Greg Weidman, and I'm a veterinarian at Southwest Ontario Veterinary Services in Stratford and Listowel, Ontario. Before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge the support of the premier sponsors for the London Swine Conference. A big thanks to Better Pork, to Farm Credit Canada, and to Total Swine Genetics. These sponsors have really stepped up to support this new online version of London Swine Conference that we have been forced to adopt, and we really thank them for their support. In addition to this, the sponsors for this live session will be listed on your screen as well. So please take note of that and don't miss an opportunity to say thanks to our sponsors yourself when you see them or when you talk to them. I'm very excited today to introduce Tom Stein. I don't think that Dr. Stein is unknown to most of us in the swine industry. He's been a leader and a visionary in pig production for quite a number of years, from his involvement in visioning and developing PigChamp and MetaFarms to his role today as the Senior Strategic Advisor for Maximus Systems. And so Tom is going to be sharing with us on the topic of measuring the cost of guessing. So Tom, before I hand this over to you, I'll just remind our audience that when it comes to questions, they can use the chat that is in our Zoom platform here to type in a question at any time during your chat. That's one nice thing about our platform. They won't be interrupting, and we'll tackle those questions after you're finished presenting. So with that, Tom, I invite you to take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Gene. Appreciate that. And yeah, I just want to say thanks for the invitation from the planning committee. This was supposed to be live last year, and something happened. We couldn't do it, but I'm really happy to be doing it this year. And this is really a sort of a hard, challenging topic. But I think I've got my arms around it, and much of what I'll talk about will be related to measurement or lack of. And if you want to get a hold of me, feel free. My email address, tstein@maximussystems.com. You can see it there. I'm doing a weekly email newsletter that I started about 6 months ago. This was last week's issue, and people like it a lot. I've gotten good feedback on the format and the content, and it's free, no cost. It's really a marketing activity for Maximus, but it's got a lot of good information in it, and people, I keep getting good comments. So I'm well, the reason I'm even talking about this is that I thought what I would do is organize this presentation the same way I organize this newsletter, which seems to work pretty well. So it's a bunch of stories, and they're interrelated each week, and that's what I'm going to do in this presentation, is talk about really lay it out like it's the London Swine Conference, March 31st, newsletter from Tom Stein, having to do with measuring the cost of guessing, right? So first, I want to start, and I always do this. Let's just take a big picture look, and then we'll dive down into sow farms and finishing. But I want to start with these benchmarks from Compeer, which is formerly AgStar. This is in Minnesota Farm Credit. I really liked AgStar, the name, better before they changed it, but now it's Compeer. And this is Mark Greenwood. Many of you probably know, and I've listened to Mark. He essentially runs all lending for Compeer on all protein species, but he's mostly been involved in pigs and swine. Their lending, especially working capital, is to 20% of the entire U.S. swine industry, right, as part of their portfolio. So when these production benchmarks are shown, they're representing 20%, and it's mostly Midwestern pork producers. And you've got a whole mix, but there's all the large scale producers are in here. And so, I mean, you can see this and see what he has to say about these benchmarks. But I want to point out that I think the most important thing he said, there were two important things. This is one of them. How many sows do we really need? How many pigs do we really need? And, I looked back, especially given the Hogs and Pigs report that came out last week, which showed, and which people were shocked at, analysts and not all producers. I think, give credit to Jim Long. He said there weren't that many pigs out there. And the thing is, I looked back at what other producers were saying, and at the time, like the CEO, Glenn Stoltz, CEO, Christensen Farms, or Merle Mortensen, the general manager of Hanover, and others were saying, we need to match our supply. And I'm talking about like the individual production system, not the industry, but we need to match our supply of pigs with the packing capacity in a much better way than we've been doing. And I think that's the biggest change in the psychology of pork producers post-COVID, or as a result or a consequence of COVID, which is, for the first time, you couldn't deliver all your pigs, right? And I don't think anybody wants to go back to euthanizing pigs or scrambling or trying to slow them down. I think that has changed the entire psychology of pork producers in the US and probably in Canada as well. And so what I mean is nobody's going back to the idea, to the psychology that you could just, we'll find the places for the pigs, right? Now in Ontario, you probably have had to think about this in a lot more often than in the Midwest, because in the Midwest, if you couldn't go to Columbus Junction, you could go to Marshalltown, or you could go to Worthington, or there's all sorts of places where you could send those pigs. That changed, right? That, to me, is the biggest thing that changed. And I think it's really what led to this shocking Hogs and Pigs report, where the numbers were so much lower, hog numbers are so much lower than what analysts expected them to be. Now, a couple things that Mark said that I thought were interesting and important. They at Compeer, at Farm Credit, have been pretty impressed with balance sheet strength that has really maintained, now improving. And of course, this was March 31st, 2020. was that last data point. And the blue line is owner's equity. So you can see that that's running about 60%. And the greenish line is the working capital per sow was up to around $800 working capital per sow, and improving. And I'm sure that it looks better now, and it looks like it will look better, at least really for this whole year. So they're from a lending perspective, from a lender's perspective, and of course from U.S. pork producers, also, really happy with the strength of the balance sheet over the last 5 years. But the second most important thing I think that Mark said in that presentation is this. So this is the profit from 2015 to the first quarter of 2020. And the blue is from operations, right? So that's the operating profit. That's the profit of actually raising or loss, raising pigs. The light green part of these bars is the net gain from hedging activities, right? And what Mark's point was that almost all the profit over the last 5 years for pork producers, as represented by this 20% that I was talking about, has come from risk management, from hedging, net gain hedging activities. And you see, especially in that first quarter of last year. And that, I think, is a really big lesson for the entire industry, for pork producers everywhere, is the fact that we're in a world where risk management, like as Mark said, there's no one that they work with that isn't professionally using risk management techniques of locking in both on the feed side and on the lean hog side of the equation. And so that leads to story number 2, which is thinking ahead in the face of these high pig prices, right? So it's amazing. And I was shocked about this. So Axios is a newsletter company. They do political newsletters and market newsletters, but they are not aimed at pork producers, and they're not aimed at agriculture. This came out, this was Monday, in the Monday newsletter that I read, one of the articles in the newsletter. World's top performing major asset, lean hogs. I looked at this and I just couldn't believe that it actually made this sort of, global newsletter having nothing to do with agriculture, except, asset managers are reading this. And of course, we know that it doesn't always continue this way, right? So it's fantastic right now, and I think especially for Ontario producers with a land base, you're producing your own corn, soybeans, turning $4 corn into $8 corn. It just doesn't get better than that. And so it's the time to really take advantage of that opportunity to, from a business perspective, right? But so amazing there. And then I like listening to John Payne, or he does a newsletter every Monday called the Swine Times. Daniel's Trading, which was just acquired by StoneX. So they're a trading company, more than just livestock. I mean, they're doing a bunch of other stuff, but out of Chicago. And he does this Swine Times every Monday. And this is what he said on Monday. So that newsletter I was just showing you, that was yesterday. This was Monday. So, and this is all as a consequence of the Hogs and Pigs report that came out last Thursday. So, this is all pretty much real time, right? So I think the important thing that he talked about, we don't, who knows what the prices are going to be. Are they in the 130s? Basically, everybody's saying, I don't know everybody, but many analysts now are thinking that we're going to see the same types of prices that we saw in 2014 as a result of the drop in pigs because of PED. So key pieces, right? It's all about the consumer, and consumer demand is really what's driving the bus. If you look at belly prices, if you look at the lean trimmings, they're all those two are historically high. And the big question is what's going to happen when people come back to restaurants now after vaccination and COVID. Even now, of course, there's variants, so that who knows? So much uncertainty. It's amazing. But this is the lean hog futures curve that he showed on Monday, and this is I just think of I think about pork producers and decision spaces, right? I mean, this is your decision space now over the next year. This goes out to that goes out to July of 2022. So this is just the futures, lean hog futures by futures month. And, this is the world that you're living in as of today with the information that we have. And this is what is you're going to base your decisions on this information right here. So, this is 100 and something, and this is in the mid 70s or something. Here's 80, 85, 90 right there. So this is what you're looking at over the next year and a half, basically, today. Not that can't change, and it will change. There's no question about it. But you're making your decisions based on this curve today. And I thought that I would look at it a different way, which is Provini, which is Cargill. Dave Bauer and his team, they send out an email newsletter every Monday. That's where they've got a model, a crush model that's like the one, sort of like the one Bob Wallenstein does up in Canada that Bob Fraser shows every once in a while in that Genesis newsletter. And then NutriQuest from in the Midwest here, they do one every Friday, I think it is. Well, anyway, what I did here was just to take, this goes back to October 5th, and just take a look at what the Provini pig flash model was showing. So this basically, it says if you place, these are for 13-pound pigs placed on feed in a nursery today, assuming average daily gain, feed conversion, corn, soybean prices, and 163 days on feed. And so back on October 5th, those pigs were coming to market. The ones placed on the week of October 5th are coming to market February of 2021. And this is what the profit forecast looked like for those placements. That's really the decision. That's the information that you had back then. And it looked good. And but people were saying it's going to be a break-even year because of what happens on the second half of the year, as you can see read on that Provini. And what I did was line these up so that this is as of Monday when the pig flash report came out. And so, like here's August 14th, and then here's August 9th. So this is like those 13-pound pigs going into nurseries today, what's the profit look like for those pigs, given those assumptions that I just talked about? What the profit looks like per head, or he does it per group, but basically it's the same thing, over the next year, right? All the way out to July of 2022. And you can see that now things have changed pretty dramatically and obviously. So this is now your sort of decision space, right? This is the information you have now, this is what it looks like. So you should be making your risk management decisions. And again, in Ontario, you don't have to worry too much about the corn and soybean, assuming you're raising your own, feeding it through your pigs. But you certainly need to be paying attention to what you want to do on risk management on hog prices going forward, because this can turn, right? And we know that. And I'm going to recommend a book that I have found really fantastic, which is called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. She was a PhD student, I think at the University of Pittsburgh or Carnegie Mellon or somewhere. Anyway, she decided that she was going to learn how to play poker, and she did, and she learned from some of the top people, and then became a world champion poker player, made a bunch of money. And what she did was to take her thoughts about poker and turn it into a more generic way of thinking about how do you decide in when you don't have a lot of information. And her big insight really is that life is like poker, not like chess. So chess, all the information is known. There's no luck. It's all the information is known. Poker, completely different story. And that her other big insight, I mean, there's a lot of great insights, but her other one really is that the outcome is not necessarily, the outcome of your decision is not necessarily an indicator of the quality of the decision. What she's saying is that in poker, it's the same thing. You don't have full information. You're making your best guess, your best bet, and but there's luck involved. And if you don't like the word luck, then you can think of it as randomness. But it's not always a guarantee as to what the outcome is. And but there's ways that you can, think it through. And that's really what she's talking about here. And when she says thinking in bets, when she means a bet, she means that the bet you're making is that out of all the possible decisions that you could make, out of the possible choices you have, and thinking in terms of risk management and pricing hogs, you're placing a bet against any other possible decision that you could make. And so it's just fantastic context for the kinds of things that people don't appreciate about what it's like to raise pigs and produce pigs, and the decisions that have to be made on a almost daily basis that most people in cities and suburbs who aren't involved in livestock production have no clue. Maybe you got to make a decision, a hard decision every year or even couple of years, whereas livestock producers are making those decisions almost every day. So highly recommended. Now let's dive into sow farms. Got to get my time here. So I, have been involved in the information system business software. I designed all the reports for PigChamp and then did it again with MetaFarms, and we're doing it again with Maximus. And there's a lot of reports, as you know, there's all sorts of ways that you can do parity distributions and breed tech analysis and all the rest. Okay, so what I've learned is keep it simple, right? So I want to show you something that I've been thinking a lot about, and I think is a way of keeping things simple. And I'm going to really, my context is weekly breeding, weekly farrowing, weekly weaning, in contrast to, a batch farrowing system. I don't work with anybody deeply enough who's batch farrowing to really have a lot of comfort with what I'd want to say in terms of what works there. I mean, in terms of just the numbers. But I have a lot of comfort with a weekly system. And it's really clear that this consistent pig flow, weaned pig flow weekly is the big thing. That's the thing that is the driver of success for sow farms and your production system. And so number of pigs weaned per week is I don't know if this has been published anywhere else, but it's something I came up with, which is that it's you can just multiply the sow inventory by a number, and it could be 0.5. That's I think a sort of a standard for me is going to tell you how many pigs weaned per week you should be producing out of that sow farm. And but now, as people are approaching 28, 29, 30 pigs weaned per sow per year, that number actually can be, 0.55 or even close to 0.6. Now, just from a benchmarking standpoint, I looked at that across like 600 sow farms, US and Canada, a couple of years ago, and the low was 0.3. So that's 2,000 sows producing 600 pigs a week. And the high was about, 0.58 or something along those lines. So maybe 1,200 pigs a week. So that's the range, right? From a benchmarking perspective in the industry today, that same number of sows gives you 600 or 1,200 pigs a week, depending on your productivity, right? And of course, you can do a quick calculation right now on just take what's your average weekly wean pig numbers and divide it by the number of sows, and you got that number. It's a, you can look at it as pigs weaned per sow per year also, but this one I think sort of tells you a lot about what's going on because it also has throughput built into that formula. Now I'm just going to show you this doesn't look simple, but this is simple. And this is something I came up with, breed farrow wean tracker. It's a spreadsheet. If you're interested, I'm happy to send you my spreadsheet. But basically, it incorporates the targets, actuals for breeding, farrowing, and weaning. And it's sort of a cohort report, meaning that you're looking at the services. And this is actual data from a farm, 2400 South Farm in Iowa. You're looking at the services, and these are the farrowings that those services result in, and these are the weanings that these farrowings result in. So that single line. So it's sort of a cohort report, and the reason I say it's sort of a cohort report is that I've gotten a lot less worried about being absolutely exact on this, and I'll tell you more in just a second about that. So I just wanted to give you the format. Now let's dive in. So now here, this is the breeding part of it, right? So we're basically what we're just doing weekly. What's the actual number of breedings? What's the target? And then what's the actual versus the target? And what's your net? So this is like a Q sum sort of, what's your net ahead or behind? And obviously the target number of services changes depending on what the farrowing rate is for that week of the year. And you can see here that the target is 122 breedings per week. For this 2,400 sow unit, maybe it's 2,300, I can't remember exactly, but it's around that. And I always figure if you're breeding about 5% of the inventory, maybe 5.3, 5.4% of the sow inventory each week. So, 5 times 24 gives you 120. So that's basically your target on average. And also remember that a target is not an average, right? A target is a minimum. That's a floor. That's the floor. That is what you want in terms of services. This is all basic. I know this is sow production 101, but just bear with me on this. And so these breedings, right, then produce these farrowings. So this week here, week number 1 is the same. I mean, it's the farrowings associated with those breedings from that first line that I showed just a second ago. And again, actual farrowing rate, actual number of sows farrowed, actual versus target, and then a Q sum net ahead or behind. And you do the same thing on live born, actual, average, and then you can calculate. I mean, then you know what your number of pigs, live pigs born is for that week. Now, again, you factor in a target farrowing rate, but that's sort of, again, the floor, and that varies, as we all know, by week of the year. In this case, their actual farrowing rate was higher than the target, but you've got a target number farrowed and an actual number farrowed, and then of course your target live born and actual live born. And again, I didn't put the coefficient of variation or the standard deviation here, but it's a big deal, right? So it's not just weekly wean pig flow, it's the variation around that, and really minimizing the variation around that. That's the key. So that leads me to this, which is the final sort of block of that tracker report. And here, you've got a target of 1203. Again, that's a floor. That's a minimum required for your business, for your production for your cash flow or pig flow through the nursery and finishing, whatever it might be. That index, whoops, sorry, let me go back. That index is the number I just talked about, where you take your sow inventory and multiply it by an index number and get pigs weaned per week. But the big thing is here is the standard deviation and the coefficient of variation. You know, I think most people now, most producers now are targeting a coefficient of variation on weekly weaned pig flow of less than 5%. And you can see that, you know, if this is 1203, the target, right? And that's a floor, even just this little section I'm showing you right here, you can see that that varies by, you know, maybe 150 pigs each week. And that's too much, right? That's in terms of consistent pig flow. So you're looking at, again, your Q sum or the net ahead or behind, and it all turns into this report, which is just, you know, a little piece of it. But here's my big point, and this is why I keep it simple. This is all you need. This is the only thing you need to run a sow farm. Now, I sometimes exaggerate for the sake of exaggeration, but I'm serious about this. This is really all that you need to see what's happening and to track it. And of course, it's really easy to see, I'm sure you guys are ahead of me already on this, that you can add the projected part of this, right? So just keep bringing those breedings down to the current week and using assumptions to project the farrowings and the weanings. And so then you've got a projected report as well. So the point of this is that the only time, I mean, this is going to show you everything you need. And if the actual target is not where you want it to be, then that's when you can dive in, right? So instead of a performance monitor, which I designed from the beginning back in 1983, that everybody is, you know, it's become a standard, but still, I don't think that's the right way to look at it anymore. I think that this is the way to look at it. And then if there's a problem, then dive in to a parity or to a breed tech analysis or whatever. But the important thing is that usually those types of opportunities are not going to show up where they're easily visible. It's just that, like, my farrowing rate's running lower than what I think it should be. So then you go in and figure out what's going on. If there's there's only two times when you will get big dramatic changes in these numbers week by week. And one of them is an acute outbreak of something like PRRS or PED or whatever it might be, a disease. And the other is if there's something like, the best example is when there was a problem with the semen cachettes, and the plastic was killing the sperm. And so, you know, all of a sudden, you know, it's like returns went way up, farrowing rate went way down, live pigs born went way down. Well, that's dramatic, and you'll see a dramatic change. But otherwise, these numbers kind of just stay pretty consistent and pretty steady. And then you have to go in and look for opportunities if you don't think your actual is where it should be relative to the target. So that's my keep it simple sow farm learning over 30 years, right? That's what I've gotten to today. Now, okay, next story, multi-suckle, multi-creep innovation. So, you know, in Europe, there's freedom farrowing stalls and multi-suckling systems that are sort of emerging. But this one that I want to talk about is what's being tried at Schwartz Farms, which is down here in southern Minnesota, where right after farrowing, they take the dividers out of each of the farrowing crates and allow all the pigs to commingle, run around, and choose to nurse on any sow that they want to. So it's right after the litter's been born, after the pigs have nursed colostrum and had their supplemental iron injection, they pull the crate divider. So it's pretty early in the game. Here I've got a video. I'm going to show you what this looks like. They changed so that they added the plastic expanded metal flooring and then put some mats for feeding. And I'll just wait because in just a second, you can see that the pigs are happily running around and playing. There we go. But just pull all those dividers and let them go. Oops. And somebody said, well, how do you know that it's multi-suckling? How do you know that it's, and they were doing a genetic trial at the same time, and they had 2 different ear tags, a green and a yellow. And there you go. So he took a picture to say, here's how we know that they're actually multi-suckling in this system. And so this is turning into Mark Schwartz. Mark is the sort of the brother that runs production for Schwartz Farms. And I think I don't know what they're 60,000 sows, 50,000. But anyway, so he's turning this into his master's with the University of Minnesota, the swine group and the vet school. And so their first results, and these are preliminary, but massive improvements in pre-wean mortality, big changes in weaning weight. And look at those weaning weights, you realize they were and have been a really pretty early wean, right? So these are 18, 19-day wean pigs. They think there's fewer fallback pigs. And the big thing I think that they see is that this gives them the flexibility to extend wean age to 25 to 27 days without, crowding the pigs. So, in a typical farrowing crate, when you've got the dividers in there, it becomes really difficult to take that wean age that much older. And there's a lot of, I think almost all the research today that's coming out is showing advantages to a 25-day wean age versus a 18, 19, 20-day wean age. So there you go. There will be more information coming out later this year about more detailed studies having to do with this system. But my toe catch at K-State is very high on this system and what they're doing there. Okay, next story, feeding sows more frequently. So this was work that's been done in Europe, Denmark, Germany, and maybe a couple other places, but started probably in 2015, has migrated now here. And the big thing is really about more frequent feedings prior to farrowing. And more frequent feeding, same amount of feed, more frequent. So, instead of once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day, 4 times a day, same amount of feed, just divided up into meals. Reduces the duration of farrowing. So farrowing goes faster. It decreases stillbirths, increases milk, increases lactation daily gain. Just a lot of good things coming from this feeding sows more frequently, 3 to 4 days before farrowing, and then also during when they're in that first week in lactation. AVMC, about 120,000 sows, decided that they were just going to do this, and so they put it in place and see across their entire system. This Joel DeRoshi, who spoke at the nutritionist at K-State Swine Day back in September or October. And what their system-wide decrease, they basically not quite cut it in half, but almost cut their stillbirth rate in half from feeding sows more frequently before farrowing. Okay, next story. Using play to increase the percent eaters. So this whole thing, percent eaters, is something that I've really grabbed a hold of. I never paid attention to it. I never even knew about it, really. But there's been a lot of research, again, coming out of Europe, but some from K-State, where looking at the percentage of eaters and creep feed and on and on. So it turns out, and this is Anushka Middlecoop's PhD thesis work that was just published in late 2019, where it was really creating play activities for these baby pigs that allowed them to sort of, I guess the best way is to say it as socializing, right? Socializing them to dry feed, right? And these things they added these, like, some canvas or some ropes or whatever, but gave them things to play with, and that increased the percentage of eaters. Now, the big thing about this is that it's not about how much creep feed they eat. I mean, it could be 50 grams, 25 grams, 10 grams, or 200 grams, whatever it might be. It doesn't matter. It's just that they do eat something is the key to the puzzle when it comes to how they handle that first 3 or 4 days in the nursery. And then this was a study that was done at K-State, where they looked at different types of feeders for creep feed. And turns out this rotary feeder with a hopper was statistically different than a rotary feeder without the hopper or a pan feeder for creep feed, and see the proportion of eaters. Now, and so pay attention to this. In the best case, it was 70%. So 70% of the pigs eaters and 30% not. And so that's what you're dealing with. Even in the best of cases, very tough to get higher, much higher than that. Of course, my first question was, how do they know? How do you tell if a little baby pig is an eater or not? And so you can put in the feed, I think it's chromium, but anyway, it colors their feces. So you can tell that they're an eater, which is why these are really good projects for grad students to do. Pick up the pig and see if it's an eater or not. But this is a big, big deal, and play is emerging as one of the key factors in getting pigs to eat prior to weaning. Okay, you've probably seen this using calipers for sow body condition scoring. Here's the caliper that Hanover is using, is developed by Mark Nauer, K-N-A-U-E-R, animal scientist at North Carolina State University. And I think the thing that's really interesting to me about both Dave Wade, who runs production for Hanover, which is like 90,000 cows, I think, and Tara Donovan, who's the head vet, independently asked, you guys are trying a lot of new technology, a lot of new things. What's the one thing that you're happiest about? And independently, they both said calipers for sow body condition. And their bottom line is that by doing this, it's added discipline into the system, saved us millions of dollars. So calipers, again, coming back to measuring, not measuring, right? Millions of dollars. Okay, now I'm going to switch over. Let's see, I got about 10 more minutes. Switch over to the finishing side of things and finish up there. So what's your wean to finish opportunity cost? And I'll show you what I mean by that. This is Greg Bilbrey, who I think has spoken at London Swine Conference maybe a couple times, but he used to be with one of the principals with AgriStats, left there a couple of years ago, joined PIC. And he presented this information at the Saskatchewan Pork Conference back in the fall. And this is PIC grow finish benchmarking. And I give PIC credit for allowing this to be published. And this is all PIC genetics, and they're looking at closeouts, the wean to finish closeouts. So 13-pound pig going in, 280-pound pig going out. And they were looking at benchmarking, total productivity or production across these closeouts. So this is all within the PIC genetics. And you can see that the top 1% only represents 4 closeouts, so this is meaningless. But the top 25%, you've got over 100 closeouts, and that means something. But the big thing is to look at this bottom 50%, right? So you're talking about bottom, same genetics, right? Bottom 50% running about 8.4% mortality, and that's average. So there's a bunch that are worse than that. In that bottom 50% on wean to finish, right? And of course, it all tracks the same. When you rank these, this is what you get. Lower daily gain, worse feed conversion, much higher mortality, and then they were calculating an opportunity cost. So this opportunity cost is against the targets that PIC would have for these genetics, what they should be doing. And if it's negative, like you see up here, of course, this means nothing because it's only 4 closeouts. But, so let's say it's in the negatives. That means that these closeouts were better than what the PIC targets would be for those genetics, right? And so then you've got this, which is almost $14 opportunity cost. That means worse, right? And in fact, if you look at the difference between this, you have to add it to this. I mean, get rid of the negative and add it. So you're talking about $16, $17, $18 pig difference between the best and the worst. Now, this is not about PIC. All right, I want to make that really clear. Every single genetics company, if they look at close, going to see the same thing, same pattern. I'll guarantee it. I see it. I've seen it over and over and over again. This is the pattern that you see, and it can be in a single system with the same pigs, the same health, the same feed, and the same building design. Still get this. You still see the same pattern, and $12 to $15 differences per pig between the best and the worst. And I don't mean the very best and the very worst. I mean the top 25 versus bottom 25 in a production system. So the thing is, why? I mean, in fact, this goes right back to the reason I did PigChamp at the very beginning, my PhD thesis. My idea was I wanted to get data from 40 sow farms in Minnesota and see if we could identify what the key factors were that separated or that created or contributed to the difference between high productivity farms and low productivity farms. That was it. That was all I wanted. Of course, things, went crazy and PigChamp became a big hit. But that's been my whole career. It's like, well, why? What is the difference here? What happens here? I'm just going to give you a couple. I'm going to give you one thing to pay attention to, and then I'll have to be done with this presentation. But so here, this is Andy J, and he's got. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. From Pillin Family Farms, and he gave this presentation at Banff, and it's a fantastic presentation where he talked about that they needed to figure out what was going on with their nurseries. So it's a big system. You can see they've got 264,000 spaces, nursery spaces, hotel style nurseries, negative pressure ventilation system. Hotel style means, you got a alleyway all along the long side and then doors leading into each of the rooms. And the background here is that they built new nurseries, not all, but they built a lot of new nurseries to replace these old concrete floor type nurseries. And then they also, in 2017, spent a lot of time and money going PRRS negative for their entire system because they wanted to be able to commingle pigs and move them all in, all out into these new nurseries. Now they had the old nurseries. They did the PRRS eradication. They built the new nurseries ready to go, put the pigs in, And the old nurseries were better than the new ones, and better average daily gain, lower mortality in the old nurseries versus the new ones. This was, obviously driving them crazy, right? So same pigs, same health status, what's going on? So what he did was they put these network video recorders and IP cameras into each of the nurseries, right? 2 to 3 weeks of video storage, and they could access that remotely. Brute force manual review of the video as it came in, especially when the pigs were first placed in these nurseries. Right? They put what are called power over Ethernet switches in the hallways in these sealed boxes, and ran cable into each nursery room through the attic. And so that means they did that because these are long buildings, so they had to get the cameras out to the furthest rooms. And then they ran an internet connection, doesn't have to be crazy fast, internet connection to each nursery. So this was their foundation. This allowed them to look at what was going on with these pigs. And they put the cameras, you can see that basically they were above the door in the bigger rooms, or they put them in the corner in smaller rooms. So they turn on the cameras, and this is what they see. Partial fill, these are big rooms, so they're not filling them all at the same time. Partial fill, first night, those pigs are obviously chilled and piling, huddling. And what they found when they looked at this, and they were looking at their the information coming from their ventilation controls and all the rest, that even though the minimum ventilation was set at the sort of standard, what they thought was right, it was on the partial fill. And it's sort of like, yeah, in retrospect, sure, okay, I understand that, makes sense, but you wouldn't see it unless you were looking. So then what they did was either turn off the second minimum ventilation fan or restrict it, slow it down in some ways. But then the other one, which I think is really interesting, and there's more that I'll show you in just a few minutes, but the other one I thought was really interesting is vaccination. So what they found was that vaccination really set these pigs back. So whether it was right off the truck or 2 days later, they were able to see that these pigs started piling, huddling, obviously uncomfortable. And as you said, we spent a lot of time figuring out, and we learned we were doing the pigs a disservice. So they moved all the vaccinations to the South Farm. Now, he said the South Farm people are not that thrilled with that idea, but that's what they did. And so it turns out that they really had a significant impact on nursery mortality by moving the vaccines, moving all the vaccinations to the South Farm. He also said we were doing the pigs a disservice when it came to our gruel feeding. So we were using these pans for gruel feeding. It increased the humidity, made the pigs wet. And again, same thing, you see the piling and the huddling, although he did say, in fact, his is common theme. It took us months to figure this out. That was the common theme on every one of these problems or issues. And their solution was to go to dry feed on mats and using gruel feeding only for the fallback pens. They also saw that there were these different laying patterns depending on the pen. So you can see it here. These pigs are looking pretty comfortable. These pigs over here are looking not that comfortable, right? Piling, huddling. And he said it drove us crazy because the old barns were doing incredibly well, right? So what they found is that these were new barns and they were tighter, but wherever there was an air leak, it was coming in a lot faster, right? In fact, they were saying, these old barns worked really well. We didn't have any drafts because we had so many holes. I mean, we had so many openings for the air to come in that it didn't create a draft on these pigs. So they solved this by, they put bubble wrap on these inlets, and they also caulked around the hole, the cutout for the inlets. They realized that there were obstructions either in front of the temp probes, in front of the humidity probes, also in front of the heaters. And they realized, okay, well, we got to fix that. But also, we need to pay more attention during construction when, because they realized that they didn't have enough attention to detail on helping the construction workers place, not cause obstructions with these key pieces to the puzzle. And this is the hotel style nursery, and you see sliding barn doors. And so they used weather stripping around those doors. So that was their solution for the drafts. But then they also had this, again, and he said this took a long time to figure out, that the barn staff was saying, how come these heaters are running all the time? And these pigs aren't looking right. What's going on? Well, it turns out, of course, this is Nebraska. So, you're out in the wide open spaces. There's a problem with attic pressurization, more air coming in than the minimum ventilation fans could take out. And so that was causing a problem with pigs and causing the heaters to run all the time, right? So they put in these shutters in the attic on either end, and it's not a complete 100% fix, but he said it certainly has made things a lot better. Then a big aha, said this is one of our big aha moments. This is a 24-hour look at humidity in a nursery. And you see the bumps in humidity. Well, that's associated with chores. So, big aha moment for them was, doing chores increases humidity. But what was happening is that the barn staff saw that there was an increase in humidity. And so then they turn up the ventilation to reduce the humidity. And then, of course, you're out and you don't look at it again. Well, that was causing a problem. And it turns out that when you do chores, pigs are running around, increases the humidity. It's transient, right? It's temporary. And it goes back down. You can see how fast it goes back down looking at that graph. And so now what their solution was, don't touch the minimum ventilation after you do chores. At least 60 minutes, give the pigs at least 60 minutes, look at how they're doing, and they put in place, that it wouldn't be one person making that decision. It would be at least two people had to decide to change the minimum ventilation following chores. So here's the questions that people ask. How much does it cost? $700 to $800 per camera. That's for the entire system installed. They did the installation, right? They had the expertise. It's not that, I shouldn't say it's not that hard, but they've got an IT group who could do it. What's the ROI? Well, their new nurseries now are outperforming the old ones, and which is what they wanted. They dropped their nursery mortality down to 2%. But probably the thing that he really focused on was that we do a much better job coaching and training our staff than we used to. We can show cause and effect, right? How about maintenance on these cameras? No problem power washing right over the cameras, but you do need to wipe the lenses down after cleaning. And the most surprising thing, he said, well, essentially we had no idea any of this was going on. What drove us to figure it out was the fact that we just built all these nurseries and the old ones were performing better. So you have to find out what the pig is telling you. Cameras can do it. I'm not trying to automate anything, just brute force, look at the video. But you don't have to spend, you don't have to have a team of 8 looking at the video. You can look at it for a short time and see what these pigs are doing. And we completely underestimated the cause and effect. Barn workers changing ventilation, chores, partial fills, on and on and on. So it's time now. So I'm gonna stop. I could keep going. And I knew I'd have, more than enough, but I think I'll end and see if there's any questions.
Very good. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, that's not an easy job to present to a computer screen, but you did a great job of keeping us engaged and leading us through a really interesting collection of stories there. So thanks very much.
Yeah.
It looks like the the most interesting story for our audience had to do with Schwartz Farm's experiment with multi-suckle, multi-creep farrowing systems.
Yep.
And so, a lot of us are thinking ahead to transitioning to loose housing. And Mitch asked the question, do we know if those piglets, if they happen to be replacement gilts and they were raised in a multi-suckle, multi-creep environment, would that actually change their behavior, their mentality, or how well they adapt to ESF groups later on in life? Any comments about that?
Well, I know what Mark Schwartz said about this whole system was that there was much less sort of antagonistic behavior, fighting at all when they place these pigs into nurseries, right? So I would guess that the answer to that is probably yes, that it does help with the socialization aspect of it. They think it improves the percent eaters. It improves the socialization as they move into the nurseries, less fighting, better pigs take off better in those first 3-4 days in the nursery. So it's an amazingly clever and simple idea. And, we'll find out more. There may be downsides to it, probably are. Don't know what they would be yet, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah. There may be some health implications of raising pigs that way. So it's probably not a one size fits all in terms of health status, but yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
A related question or comment, really, like we know that the sow can choose when she wants to begin voluntary milk letdown, and we know that the piglets can choose, and then they keep the teat that they want. So it looks here that in this multi-suckle, multi-creep system, the piglets are just simply doing a better job of cross-fostering themselves than we do when we try and train our staff to do it for the piglets.
Right.
Is that your observation too?
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you again, another thing that Mark said was that they create a separate little area, which is like 4 crates, I think it is. And they do take the smallest pigs and put them into that sort of, subgroup, right? Just to make sure that they have good access and they're not competing with the bigger pigs.
Super. Just a reminder to our audience, if you want to ask a question or make a comment, just use the Zoom chat to do so. Tom, we've all heard the old adage, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And Mike Brum has chimed in here and added to that and said, just because you can measure it doesn't mean it's important. And there's probably some truth to that. So, talk about your philosophy or your tips for deciding what data is important and what data to ignore. And I think you touched on how you're really keeping it simple in the sow barn, but can you expand on that?
Yeah, it's it's interesting. I think that there's a lot of like I said about when I said about that one report, I was saying it's sort of a cohort report. What I forgot to mention is that I used to try to be exact, like, okay, these sows were bred and these exact same sows then farrowed. But of course, I mean, if all the sows farrowed at day 112 and all of them farrowed at day 119, you'd have a full week, you'd be perfect, but that's not how it works. And so you're always splitting weeks with your farrowings. And I don't care about that anymore. I mean, I don't worry about that on a report like I was showing you. And because it all works out over time. But I think that, for example, unless I'm not talking about nucleus multiplication, I'm talking about commercial, the birth weights and weaning weights. Like we don't have to weigh all pigs at birth. We don't have to weigh all pigs at weaning. But it does, I think, really sort of help in terms of understanding what's going on with your pigs and your production system to just do sample weights, and you don't have to worry about it. It doesn't have to be random sampling. It's not, we're not talking about doing a research trial, just 30, sample size of 30 every couple months or something along those lines. So I think we can get a lot smarter at measuring or doing things, recording things that without all the labor. Like, and for example, one of the things we're working on right now is a GDU system where we're automatically detecting puberty and heat in gilts and automatically putting that into a recording system. We don't have the weights automatic yet, but in a commercial GDU, that's the whole idea. Is we're going to have less and less labor availability on farms. So how do we get better results with fewer people? Mm-hmm. And the smartest systems that I know right now are really they're hiring smarter, younger people, but fewer of them.
Just a follow-up question on that, or a specific question. It's always seemed to me that one area that we are guessing and using a manual process is when it comes to determining which sows in a wean group will be culled. So any comments about that? Is there data that should be that you would prefer to drive that decision other than perhaps parity?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's because it ties into, obviously welfare is the number one concern, and but and you've got incentives that sometimes work the wrong way, right? Just like meeting breeding targets, but what if the sow is too thin or lame or whatever? But somebody's going to meet the breeding target because that's what they're incented on. So that gets to be a problem. But I can tell you what's been a shock and really interesting to me is commercial sow farms now, where like we created an index that's just a production index, not a genetic index, where it takes into account lifetime productivity and farrowing interval and live born, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of systems that are just going through and say, 10% every quarter get culled, and the bottom 10%. So I'm not sure that there's any algorithms yet that can say that, or even that we need to predict which sows should be culled, but clearly it's the welfare piece of it is number one.
Yeah. Thanks for highlighting that. That's a good point. And with cull sow values at a Canadian dollar per pound, there's no wrong answer. Just going back to the multi-suckle, multi-creep, could you just review for us again, at what age were the folks at Shorts Farms pulling the dividers out from between litters?
Yeah, so what he said was and they're doing this so it's it's two adjacent farrowing traits, right? Mm-hmm. So pigs are born, they nurse that sow for colostrum, they get a supplemental iron injection, and as soon as that is done, they pull those dividers. So what is that? Maybe mm-hmm. more than 24 hours, but not much more.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
36 hours, something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very good.
Yeah.
So last call for questions coming in from the chat. I don't see any other questions, and I am looking at our time now at 10 after 1. So, Tom, I'll thank you again. Great presentation. We really appreciate it. There is one more question here, so maybe we'll make this our final question.
Sure.
And the question is, where are the industry leaders at in terms of identifying a defect in the growth process post-weaning and making an effective intervention to return the process to normal. Okay, so I think we're talking about wean to finish opportunity cost again, but what are the industry leaders doing to identify defects in the process and fix it before we have the batch end, I think is the question.
Yeah, well, I think there's two things, and one of them is work that we're doing at Maximus, which is taking all this environmental data. In fact, that's what I was going to talk about next.
Okay.
Taking all this environmental data, all this, this data that comes in hourly, and doing something with it that allows us to make early interventions, right? So in other words, we're looking at, you look at a closeout, but it's an active group. So you've got information for each day in terms of feed and mortality and treatments and other things. But what we're doing is we're linking then what was the environment that they were exposed to. So it's an exposure factor, right? That environment at that time. And hopefully we'll be able to make some predictions. Now I'm talking about a 2 to 3 year, process here in terms of looking at this, but being able to see early and in real time when things might be headed the wrong direction. And then the second thing is, I think this machine learning, which is relevant to us in pig production when it comes to using the and analyzing pictures. And so Katarina Dominiak over in Denmark did a really cool study where she was basically set up a camera, not to do video, not to do infrared, not to do 3-dimensional, blah, 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 with the weights and all the rest of it. Just take pictures of the pigs as they were at the feeder, and then analyze those pictures with an algorithm that says, this is what they weigh, right? This is what each one of these pigs weighs, more or less. And so being able to get that accomplished, all of a sudden you've got real-time growth curve. So I think those are the two things that come to my mind about sort of early awareness, early intervention.
Wonderful. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
That's good. I think our time is at an end. So Tom, again, I'll thank you. I really appreciate you making yourself available today. Thanks to our audience for joining up online for this novel way of meeting at the London Swine Conference. I'll just let you know that if you go to the London Swine Conference website, all of yesterday's videos are already posted. They're very high quality, very easy to access there. And today's information and this session and the other sessions will also be there as well. So you can keep visiting back to the London Swine Conference webpage to take in the whole conference at your leisure. Just want to say thanks to the sponsors again before we wrap up here. So in particular, I want to shout out to Better Pork, Farm Credit Canada, and Total Swine Genetics for leading the sponsorship of this event. And then as you've been seeing on your screen, we have sponsors for this live session, and we want to thank them as well. So again, when you run into those folks or talk with those folks, make sure you say thanks. And with that, I will adjourn today's session. Everyone stay safe, take care, and we hope to see you soon.
Thanks.